Hello, everybody. Welcome to Human Conversations.
Hello.
Today, Chelsea and I are going to be talking about emotions. You want to introduce our little series, Chelsea?
Yes. Yeah, so we are doing a series on some emotions that we have chosen. Um, and we're going to go in depth for the next 4 episodes on these different emotions. So today we are going to talk about injustice.
Yes. So this episode will be focusing on the feeling and emotion of injustice. So I like to start, of course, with some definitions just to kind of lay some ground ideas here. Um, And I looked up a few different definitions for injustice, Webster's Dictionary, Wikipedia, and I found these following definitions. So, absence of justice, violation of right or of the rights of another, an unjust act, or in parentheses, they put the word a wrong that was done. So, those are some interesting definitions. I'm curious what you think about those, Chelsea.
Yeah, can you reread that last one?
Yeah, an unjust act or a
Mm.
wrong that was done.
Yeah, that really resonates with me. And I think it's interesting because it can be so different in such different situations, right? Like, and who is
Mhm.
to decide what is just and what is not? So it's kind of tricky. These things are really complicated.
Yeah, for sure. And people in a position of power have been able in the past to determine what was just and unjust, right?
Mm, right. Yes. So we are going to talk about sort of this ins and outs of this emotional experience when we feel injustice.
Right. So first we're going to kind of focus on this, what it sounds like and what it looks like when this emotion is occurring and what usually is causing this emotion to happen. And then we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about what it feels like.
Mm.
But first, we're just going to focus on what it sounds and looks like. And this includes non-verbals as well as verbals.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if you want to go first, Chelsea.
Sure. So, okay. So for me, when this feeling comes up, injustice or this feeling of it being unfair, something being unfair, is a theme in my life. Being a multicultural human being, being biracial, I've always felt this dangling emotional experience when it comes to being born between like two different countries, right? And um, just meeting my mom and my dad's different cultures, and the fact that my dad wasn't born here. And so I've often felt injustice due to the fact that my parents parent me and my sibling really differently. And I also felt growing up that I never quite belonged to either party, either
Mhm.
culture. So I often felt as though, like, who are you to tell me where I can belong, right? Who is anyone to tell me if I'm allowed to resonate more here or resonate more there? And so I constantly was in a battle with that. And so for me, what it sounds like and what it looks like is when people start to have judgment or place questions on my actions or my reactions, my how I'm experiencing something. So oftentimes that for nonverbal or for verbal, that can look like, let's say for nonverbal, it looks like if I'm sitting in a conversation and the person speaking is looking at everyone else constantly and not me in the conversation,
Mhm.
or their body is turned mostly towards who they're speaking to, and I'm left out of the conversation because their body language is primarily facing a certain way towards certain people. A lack of eye contact, right? verbally, this can look like a lot of those statements that can be sympathy as opposed to empathy. So like, oh well, it's okay, just suck it up. Or someone who's not really fully understanding where my responses or reactions could be coming from.
Mm-hmm.
So it sounds like very, let me brush this under the rug kind of thing. Statements like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, like not honoring your experience, basically, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and that happens a lot from people of privilege in their response to minority um, population. People of color like get that reaction a lot for their experiences.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's difficult because in my family, that's an everyday experience for me. I have parents, like I said, I have parents who have come from very different, and they've internalized that patriarchal power in their own ways. And you know, my mom's internalized it in her womanhood. My dad has internalized it being an immigrant, and then they came together and had two children. So it's difficult because I can kind of put words to different situations now that I've been diving into these topics over the past few years of my life. And so I think actually when you become more aware and can express it, it's even more frustrating because you feel this sense of hopelessness, you know? But we'll get into the rest after that. What about for
Yeah.
you?
Something that really usually triggers me with a feeling of injustice is when I hear when there's these comparisons between men and women. Usually relating to women reaching a certain position of power. So for example, whenever I hear like a woman CEO or a woman politician, etc., and I've heard for sure in my life people say like, oh well, she's just as good as a guy, and like, or like
Mm,
she does it just as well as like any man would, and the comment is meant to say like, I think, to be honest, I think it's meant to good with good intention, right? It's meant to be like, oh yeah, like she could do it just as good as him. But then it's like, well, why is there a comparison as if she has to do it as good as him? Like, why is there a
mm,
comparison between women and men in the sense that a woman can't just be recognized on her own merit? It has to be in some way compared to this position of privilege that's held by a man, right?
mm-hmm.
Um, so it feels really unjust. I mean, more unjust, obviously, for me when I hear people putting women down or like saying they have inabilities to do the same things that
Mm-hmm.
other people can do. So for me, that's constantly triggering and definitely invokes that emotion in me. And those are usually verbals right there. Those are verbal examples.
Mm-hmm.
Non-verbals are just like the fact that women don't get paid as much as men for doing the same job.
Mm-hmm.
That's a clear non-verbal experience, right? If I'm doing the same job as somebody else and I find out that I'm getting paid less, that is not a good feeling. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
Especially if I feel like I'm working harder, which
Mm-hmm.
generally women of color, from experience, feel like they have to work harder a lot of the time to gain the same amount of level of respect or
Respect.
pay and such. Yeah. And I think that just points to like more macro level type of aggressions, and definitely more macro injustices, I would say. But when I think of more like micro and smaller range, I remember like in my family, um, growing up, I would hear things like, "Oh, girls don't do that," or "Boys don't play with that," or like, "If you want to be a good girl, you have to do this," or
Mm,
just like these implicit, well, explicit and also implicit sometimes ideas of what a woman is capable of doing or
mm-hmm.
allowed to do.
Mm-hmm.
And like those limitations, and then me feeling like that was extremely unjust. I did not like hearing that I had these limitations when my cousin could just do all of these other things, and I just
Mm.
thought that was not fair. And
Oh yeah, that's yeah.
yeah, I didn't sit well with that, and I'll explain more about my reactions later. But
Hmm.
and what were you gonna say?
Well, when you're saying that, it's bringing up this memory for me of because being raised by someone who was from Afghanistan and of the culture, um, I wasn't allowed to do a lot compared to my friends and my peers, and unfortunately, my peers, they didn't quite understand any of that, and I never felt enough self-worth to be able to express it, so it was constantly hidden within me. And I felt so much unfairness and injustice in my relationship with my father growing up because I was never allowed to feel, to cry, to express my emotions, or to even like someone if I had a crush, or express that I had interest in that, because it was constantly not okay. And not only was it made to be not okay, but it was shamed. It was something that was, how do I almost want to say gross or disgusting, because you don't do that when you're younger. That's the kind of mentality it was. But I feel, I don't know, part of me is like, I don't know if I want to put that big label on it, but that's how it felt, quite honestly.
Mm,
So it was difficult because I had to unlearn and make sure, or not only unlearn, but I had to rewire my brain and my body to recognize that those are natural. It's a natural response to have an attraction towards another person, no matter if it's a romantic or not. It's just a natural part of life to want to feel connected or to feel connected to something.
right.
So that was difficult, and it was really unfair. That's another big one. That's how it looked like. That's what it sounded like. You're not
Mm,
allowed to like anyone, or you need to focus on school. You need to get a career. You're going to support yourself. Those types of things.
yeah, I had a similar, like, my family definitely gave me messages of like not dating and not getting involved with people and such. Although they didn't, I will say this, my family never really encouraged the males in my family to date or anything anymore or less. It was more, they really wanted everybody to just focus on education. Um, because that was really important to my family. We didn't, being his Mexican American, we were like second generation. My other family didn't get higher education; they weren't able to do that, so they really wanted us to be the first ones to do that.
Mm,
And so there was a lot of focus on education, but
mm,
for the women as well as the men, which I appreciated. Um,
yeah.
so that was a little more just in regards to the dating situation. We were, nobody was encouraged to do it basically.
Mm.
So yeah.
So,
Do you want to move on to now what it feels like?
let's do that. Okay.
So in feels like there's a few things, right? There's the physical sensation that you feel, and as well as like the emotional processes that go on, the reactions, as well as maybe after you've had time to settle with the emotion, right?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Physically, what are some, when you feel an injustice happen? I can go for section some because I have a really good example. So I was young. I had to have been around 13 at the time when this happened, and I was with my father, who was a truck driver. He would drive across states to transport different goods. And I went with him once. He would sometimes take me. And so we went to, I think it might have been Arizona. I don't really remember at the time. But we got to this place where he was going to drop off some things. And the person who was conducting the transaction was a white male. And so I was standing by, and my father was figuring out, I guess, like how to unload the stuff. But the white worker said something really insulting about my father. He like called him like an idiot or something like that. But I felt like it was racially, even at that age, felt like it was racially stirred, as well as potentially like because of my father's position, and this guy was like a manager, thinking that my father was less than for being a truck driver. And in that moment, I felt like physically like tense. I felt myself like, and that was the first time I ever like noted like being so aware of like an injustice that was happening in front of me. Besides when I was little, of course, and the boys got better treatment, but like in regards to like social comparisons, like I never had anything outside of the family in that same way. So that was my first experience with that, and I remember feeling physically tense and feeling like I wanted to cry and yell at the guy at the same time, but feeling voiceless.
Wow. And I know so much of people who identify as being a woman, that piece of being silenced is so common. That's a common theme, that we're stripped of our voice, right?
Also, I felt like as a girl of 13, I couldn't speak up either. Like I felt like that I wasn't in a position to say anything to this man, right? This older man.
Right. So that kind of shows there's like some sort of age value that you were taught, that like you don't, right? Yeah,
definitely. In my culture, we don't speak disrespectfully to elders.
Yeah, same. Wow.
But I think in that moment, that's why I felt this like, because I was born, raised in an American culture, so part of me wanted to like definitely felt like I wanted to say something. I felt like in shock too, like that he saw me. I mean, he saw me standing there. He knew I was, that was my father, and the fact that he would say that in front of me also confused me.
Yeah. So you had like opposing narratives in your head of like, okay, I want to say something, but I can't say something, and then this just is not fair. Wow.
Yeah.
So your body got tense.
It did. It got tense, and it got like it kind of just got confused and didn't know what to do in that moment. It didn't feel good for sure. I'm laughing about it now because I'm thinking back on it, and like now I recognize it, but at the time I didn't know what that was. Really like one of the first times where I feel like I felt like a physical reaction to injustice.
Do you usually feel tense in like a specific part of your body?
Just more like my stomach will get like get tight, and then definitely my neck and shoulders. I carry all my weight there.
Yeah. Wow.
How about for you? What are the physical sensations that you experience?
Well, I am a crier. I am very close to my emotions, and so for me, I think I really feel it in my heart space. I'm similar to you. I tense up as well. My muscles get tense. The top half of my body, just all of it, my neck, my arms, my chest gets red. I'm very sensitive, so I get physical reactions and responses are very common for me, and that's why I do so much yoga. I've been able to integrate all those spaces within me to kind of connect what's going on so that I can handle it and manage it. So for me, when I'm feeling this sense of unfairness and injustice, my voice definitely, I don't have a voice. I get quiet. So I feel my throat closing up, and I feel heat. So my chest gets red and my body gets tense. And I just noticed this huge want and desire to pull away. So my chest caves in. And but it's similar to you, where I have this gut, what's it called? Knee-jerk reaction where I want to push forward and say no and speak up. When I was little, just like you, I didn't have the tools or resources to do so, so I would cry instead. And then as I've gotten older, I have been able to find my voice in those moments. And then I have more language, because before I didn't have the language, and now I have more language to put to those pieces. But it's still difficult to attach emotions to my physical sensations of what I'm feeling, because I tend to not want to judge myself so much, because it's just a human experience. That's what happens. Our body thinks we're in danger in some way.
Mm.
So our nervous system kicks in. Um, yeah, that's what my physical
Yeah,
experience
sounds
would
like
be.
those are also what your first reactions and responses usually are, right? From the past to now, it sounds like there's been a little bit of transition in your responses, but those are kind of how you respond generally.
Right.
Yeah, I think for me, when I was little, for sure, anger would be, I would respond in an angry
Mm-hmm. Me too.
way, which usually was like an outburst of some kind, just really pointing out the injustice.
Mm-hmm.
And that was because it was with my family usually, so I felt comfortable expressing myself with them. When it came to my reactions in society, like in community, when I got older, I was definitely not verbal. And although I still felt the anger, it was more like a smoldering kind of
Mm-hmm.
anger versus like a really expressive, like quick outburst. It was more like I can't. I felt like I couldn't speak up, or scared of speaking up for whatever reason. And so it would be more something like a smoldering thing that I would just sit on for a while and kind of process on my own. Um, Now, though, I feel like I am definitely much more verbal when there's an injustice that happens, and anger is probably not anger's there, but it's not the controlling factor anymore. I feel like I definitely have much more awareness of myself and like my emotions and my ability to control thoughtfulness in my approach, so that I I feel like I'm pretty quick in thinking about these things too now, because I've had time to think about them
Mm-hmm.
over time. So like I know how I would like to respond to these kinds of situations when I see an injustice, and as well as when one happens to me personally.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not quiet anymore. Whereas before I might be a bystander and not say anything. I don't feel like I'm that way anymore. If I see an injustice happen, I'm usually on board to at least check in with the person or to call out if I feel safe enough in the situation.
You bring up a good point, because I definitely I'm explaining my experience personally, but when it comes to other people and I see injustice, my voice does not get silent. I tend to be I'm that annoying girl or person or woman now who will speak up and say what is on
But see,
her.
that's not annoying.
No, I know, but you know how people, oh, it's not annoying, but you know how people will perceive that. That's why in friend groups or in spaces, I've not ever been, I honestly feel like part of the reason why I've not been necessarily welcomed back is because I see it exactly the time it happens. I point it out, even if someone does it to themselves and I can't sit with it, like I'll have to say something, whether that's outright or whether it's hidden in how I say it. I can't,
Mm.
it's just really difficult for me to be silent, because I think it's easier for me to do it outside of myself. But when it comes to being in my own body and experience, that's where I tend to not speak up as much. Well, before now, I'd
Mhm.
say I definitely am able to sit with it more, like you said. But I do think, depending on the relationship that I feel it in, for instance, if it's within my family, I feel this defensiveness or resistance come up for me, where I want to close off and just go back to being in my own space, because I don't feel like it's my responsibility to have to sit there and explain more and more, you know?
Mhm.
But I think in my other relationships with friends or intimate relationships, I can tend to get a little bit bothered. That's usually my response. Rather than resistance, it's more like bothered. And so I work through it, but I nonetheless, I have to honor my feelings, because if I don't, I tend to skip over them and I want to fast forward, and then that's just brushing it under the rug.
Yeah, and this is something I work with clients a lot too. When an injustice happens, they feel like they can't go back and address it. And I'm always like, oh no, you can definitely start up a
Hmm.
conversation about when this happened, how this made
Hmm.
you feel, because you don't want to encourage people to continue to do things that are going to make you feel this way. Um, it really
Right.
helps in you speaking up and you owning your voice and expressing your needs. But it's the main point is like you can always go back to this conversation and always start up this conversation no matter what it is always appropriate to talk about what is just in the world.
Right. So, I hope this was a helpful conversation for people, just to put language to everyday experiences that literally everyone in the world goes through, whether it have the same label of emotion or different physical sensations. Nonetheless, it's our body's form of trying to protect ourselves, and then figuring out how to put that out into the world, right?
Right.
um, Sometimes we go right. Western culture is very much, let's go into the fixing, let's go into the curing, and we lose so much of the process of healing within that mentality. And so we wanted to really focus on the ins and outs of just what simply this emotion can sound like, look like, feel like, and, so that you don't skip over what the magic is when you acknowledge those things and when you look at what really happens in your own personal experience.
Yeah. So thank you everybody for listening. Please share this episode or other episodes with anybody who you think this might be helpful for. We look forward to hearing your feedback.
Mm-hmm. And tune in for next time. We're going to talk about a different emotion, and we will have 3 more in our series.